the same with kid related issues.
Mm-hmm.
It's here's our day-to-day schedule. The one thing I've been saying to in my mediation cases recently is, you know, help me understand your day to day and
Mm-hmm.
pretend that I am a, cameraman for your reality show. What am I
I
seeing?
like that.
Right?
Right.
Like, walk
Right.
me through it. Because then, people will then start saying, okay, well, we're up at 7 because we've got to get out by 7:45 because kids have to be at school by 8. You,
Yep.
so you start then creating like a timeline of information,
Mm-hmm.
right, from your day to day that you don't think about, but those are the components that are going to help formulate the strategy on the parenting and the financial side. So you know more than you think you do. And the more you can just kind of write down things, the
Mm-hmm.
better you are, and you can really kind of help your lawyer help you.
Right. And I think every family is different, to your point, and you're able to
Yes.
talk through some of these things in mediation. What trends are you seeing with your mediation clients? Before we got started, I was telling you how I'm taking my son on this college road trip, right? And how in my mediated divorce settlement, it does not cover anything to do with college, cars, car insurance, any of this stuff, which I am obsessed with having my clients make sure are in theirs. Are you seeing more people think ahead to some of these things, even if their kids are 3 or 4? Because I hope so.
Yes, we are. There's a couple of things that, I'm seeing. I will tell you, we're actually seeing more women as the primary breadwinner,
Interesting.
um, which is great. Except what that means, though, is then we're also seeing the reverse, right? Which means that they may not know as much about the day to day scheduling because their spouse is the one
Hmm.
who's kind of handling it. But on the planning side of things, people are much more well versed on all of the kind of post secondary. So, those
Yep.
very things that you were discussing,
Good.
people are very well versed in those. People are also very coming in and really speaking a lot to what's important for their kids in terms of we have a lot of kids who are involved in a lot of different things. And so there's a lot of conversation about schedules, parenting schedules that are aligned with like travel sports
Right,
and
right.
having that kind of, how does that impact? Another big one is we have a lot of families who are either of mixed race or religion,
Hmm.
and so we're having a lot more conversations about how to balance the
Hmm.
cultural awareness on both sides and extended family. But people are really starting to really give voice to their needs in a way that we didn't always see before, particularly women, which is very nice. It's a really nice shift.
Good. I like to hear that. Um, you know, Anything else that I've missed before we move on to our truth or trap segment that you want to add?
Yeah, I think people should always consider mediation, right?
Hmm.
And even if in your mind you're thinking, my spouse is high conflict, there's no way we're going to ever agree to anything. I think it's worth meeting with different type of mediators because some mediators, especially former judges, right, have a practice style that really lines itself with high conflict cases. So I would certainly say check out your options relative to mediation. And if mediation isn't where you find yourself, maybe even look into collaborative, which is a little bit
Hmm.
different, right? You have a collaborative team. You may have a divorce coach who's a part of that team,
Right.
but consider these as options before just kind of assuming or defaulting to the traditional litigation process. It really can make a difference in your overall divorce experience.
And when we were talking about the cost of mediation, right, as opposed to litigation, and you said at the beginning of this podcast how people have no idea what divorce is really like, right? Because they
Yes.
just picture what they hear or see on TV. And I think there's no more way that's evident than when they get their first bill from a litigator, right?
Yes.
They
Yes.
might fall off their chair, right? Kimberly, because it's
Yes.
like, wait a minute, that one time I emailed them over something that was $400, or I called this time and that was, $1,000 for this issue. So, that can tick up very, very quickly. And I hear this often when sometimes I had a woman the other day who wanted to do just one session coaching with me and she was stressed about money. And of course, I'm never pushing anyone into coaching with me, but I had to give her a reality check that like my rate for 1 hour is like what you're going to be charged from a
Yes.
litigator for like reading an email or two, right? And if you aren't aware of that, it's hard because you're making decisions about mediation or coaching or whatever. My cat just came in. Jeez. um, without the knowledge, right?
It's true. Listen, legal fees are expensive.
Hmm.
And talk about girl, wake up. This is a wake up moment, right? Legal fees will get the wind out of your sails in a heartbeat because people don't conceptually think about the fact that there is an individual who's billing
Hmm.
every interaction that they have with you. And so you have to ask yourself, is it really this important for me to be fighting over these sheets? Or the cost that I'm spending to have this lawyer go back and forth, can I just otherwise replace them? Right? Like you have to, and I know
Right.
that sounds silly in some ways, but it's
No.
really true because then you'll get your bill and you'll be, hitting the roof and wanting to call the lawyer and say, why are we spending so much money on silly things? And their response will be, well, I told you 3 times that maybe you should let the personal property issue alone, or maybe we should focus on the big picture items. And so, legal fees certainly tick up in the litigation process, and you hit it spot on. When people get after the first month, there's absolutely a shift, right?
Right.
New clients, I always say, I love a new client. They want to email, they want to call, and I keep saying, okay, I hear you, but maybe let's make this an email. We don't need to schedule a phone call.
Right.
And
It's an emotional time, right, Kimberly?
it's an
So,
emotional time.
you can pay for that, right? Because,
Yes.
that's a role of a coach in many ways. I tell my clients, call me, email me. You're annoyed
Yes.
about what your ex did over the weekend. We can probably handle it. I'm always going to defer to the attorney on legal issues, of course, but some of this little stuff, like we can handle,
Yes.
right? So I think
Yes.
that's really important. Okay,